Simon's Universe of Music. I am absolutely so excited today to have this grand honor of talking to Jeff Slate, who is a singer-songwriter from the United States of America, New York City. He has met everyone who I love pretty much, from Pete Townshend to Ringo, Noel, Paul Weller, Bob Geldof. I could go on for a long time, I suppose, saying all the names that we love. But Jeff has given me his time. We're going to talk about everything that we love. And Jeff, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. So, what a great introduction. And we do.
Yeah.
We share a lot of, that's how we connected. We share a love of the same kind of music.
Absolutely. Well, from when I started this and how we've connected, and obviously with trying to get people to see Summers Universe of Music, I can honestly say to you, right, when you look through all the names of obviously who you're connecting with and who you want to join the universe, I don't know what it was, but then you see, in fact, I know what it was. I saw an interview with you, with Noel, and I was just like, wow. It's just like, wow, who's this guy? And and it's just like, it's amazing. I believe in fate, Jeff. It's amazing how the universe works and how music brings people together.
Absolutely true.
And I'm so lucky that I've got this opportunity to talk to yourself about the greatest thing in the world, which I absolutely love. So
cool. Well, let's do it.
Let's do it.
You can keep telling me how great I am, or you can ask me questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I tell you what, I'm going to go straight into the big ones.
Okay,
so,
sure.
Can you tell us when you got the call for the liner notes for Sgt. Pepper and how you felt doing that work on that album?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a call. I got a phone call from Jeff Jones, who's the Beatles manager.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of mutual friends, and we've met socially a few times, but I didn't know him at all. And he called up and told me a bit about the project, and I kind of started auditioning for the job on the telephone.
Yeah.
And he stopped me and he said, Jeff, we want you to do this. I trust that you're going to do something great. Don't worry about it. And I thought that was, that really blew my mind. They wanted somebody, I think they wanted somebody from America to write about the American perspective on Sgt. Pepper. And I think from what he told me, they wanted somebody a little bit younger, that they had, who could talk about, what happened in the 60s, but also have a more modern perspective on it. So, I guess exactly what they were looking for. And he said, do you want to do it? It's, kind of like, of course I want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's funny though, because then we hung up the phone and I thought, wow, that's a pretty big gig. I mean, a lot comes, there's a lot of pressure that comes with a job like that. And so, then I sort of took a minute to kind of be overwhelmed. And then I just spent, I didn't have much time to really spend, but I spent at least a week just digging into that period about the Beatles.
Yeah.
And, thinking about what I wanted to write. And I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to say, but I didn't want to be like referring to the internet or referring to notes, referring to books. I sort of consumed everything I could, a bunch of videos and the anthology book that they'd done, all sorts of things. And then I just sat down to write it, because I think that's the best way to do it, is to just kind of let it flow. And I turned it in. They had a pretty tight deadline. And then it was really interesting that they liked it, which was, pretty humbling in and of itself. Yeah. And then we went through the editorial process, which was fascinating, because, each of the principals, as they call them, which is Paul and Ringo and Olivia and Yoko, and their teams have to read it and kind of, bless it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And the feedback I got was very positive. I mean, I think there were a couple of comments, here and there. Like, I think Paul had one correction because he was actually there. That's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Ringo was cool with it. Olivia had one comment about, because I focused on George's trip to the Haight-Ashbury. So she had just a factual correction there, and Yoko was cool with it. It was very, it's just such an amazing experience. But what was really cool about it was everybody involved in it. They had a guy who was managing the project as well as the team at Apple Records.
Yeah.
They were just so great to work with. I mean, I do liner notes all the time, and you usually deal with like one manager or the artist or the record company. This was like a team of people, but everybody was so great and so committed to the project.
Yeah.
And the most satisfying thing was, 6 months or so later, they had an event for the release. They had a little release party here in New York City.
Yeah.
And Jeff Jones came, and I think Jonathan Clyde, who sort of was one of the project people over at Apple there, and Giles Martin was here.
Right.
And, we had only at that point really corresponded, and I had met them all separately.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Giles and I sat down for a while after the event and talked, and we felt like we'd really been through something incredibly special.
Oh,
he's done obviously a few of these projects for them, and has done several more since.
Yeah.
But that one, Sgt. Pepper and the 50th anniversary, and it was such a, in my estimation, it was the best of all the boxes that they've done.
Yeah.
And it's just such a special experience for everybody involved. So the call was, humbling and exciting and a little overwhelming, but it was just one of those things that, I never would have. I had met Jeff Jones about a year prior.
Yes.
And had joked with him that if you're going to do a Revolver box set, I'd love to be involved.
Yeah.
And he didn't even remember that. That's he meets people all the time that say stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that obviously didn't happen. But I was even considered for it still to this day.
Sure. I mean,
of any of the bands I've worked with, doing liner notes for Bob Dylan, doing liner notes for the Beatles.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first box sets I worked on was the Small Faces box set.
Right.
And, that's like my favorite band. That they are my band.
Yeah, I can understand that.
That was really an amazing experience because I got to work with Kenny and Mac. Mac was still alive at the time.
Yeah.
I got Pete Townsend to do a forward, and I got Paul Weller to do a contribution. It was just a great experience. But there's something about working with as much as I love the Small Faces, there's something about working for the Beatles.
Oh, absolutely.
That is, put it this way. My mom, who is now 94, who is not a Beatles fan by any stretch, was impressed. It's the Beatles.
It's the Beatles.
It's like, it's one of those things that, when they write my obituary, it'll be like, oh yeah, he did liner notes for the Beatles.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Jeff, I can honestly tell you right now, when I first started working, when I was like 16, and I wanted to go out and buy music, right? I was like, obviously asking my dad, like, so what's the first Beatles album that I buy, And it was that, mate. It was that, And I can remember how much I paid for it. I paid 16 quid for that in Virgin Megastore. Yeah. And it was just like, in my eyes, Jeff, for being a guy that grew up during the 90s and obviously having everything evolved from the 1960s that is going to influence my life in music, that surely. And I mean, there's been magazine polls and TVs and everything that have said that's pretty much number one.
Yeah.
And...
No, everybody I know always says, I got to do Pepper and I got to do Blood on the Tracks.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Those are like the two, if you could choose, if I had been that, the same sort of 15-year-old kid buying those albums, thinking, what if I could work on a Beatles project, it would be Sgt. Pepper. That just blows my mind.
I mean, have you met Paul?
I've not met Paul.
Right.
I've been at an event he was at, and there's been a couple of occasions where I was supposed to meet him and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But I've met Ringo, you know, a dozen times, and it never gets old.
No.
I mean, it was funny because I was at an event a couple of years ago, and Ringo walked in, and he walked by me, and he said hello to me and a buddy of mine,
Yeah.
who's a drummer, by name. And we looked
Yeah.
at each other like, Ringo knows our fucking names. That's insane. That's so crazy. How does Ringo Starr know my name? I'm just this kid from, you know, it's like,
yeah.
So,
I mean, Jeff, how does that feeling feel? Like from when, in fact, and what I'm going to say is, how does the feeling feel when we've grown up idolizing all these people, and you get to like meet people like Ringo,
yeah,
or Dylan,
yeah,
or, you know, Townshend, or anyone like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, I know they say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but I want to, doing this, what I'm doing, I want to meet all my heroes.
Yeah, of course.
And I want to speak to them, and I want to ask them, and it's just like, you know, I want to know how that I want them to tell me how them feelings are of when they wrote that song, and just understand
and what makes them tick. You know, I'll tell you, I've never been intimidated by famous people. I've never been starstruck.
No.
I can remember the only time I did an interview where I sort of stopped for a second and thought, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I was interviewing Willie Nelson.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, and Willie Nelson, when you talk to him, he sounds like Willie Nelson, you know? It's such a, you know, he's such a character.
Yeah.
But that kind of, I stopped in the middle and was like, you know, holy cow, this is Willie Nelson. But I'll tell you, it's a funny thing. Like, you know, I've been in rooms with all the Monty Python guys.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and Ringo many times, just the two of us in a room.
Yeah.
And you know, Weller I've gotten to know pretty well over the years, and Noel to a certain degree too. And, you know, these guys who I really respect and admire, but when you're sitting there with them, they're just guys. And the best thing about it, I'll say the best thing about it is pretty much all the people I admire are music fans as much as we are.
Absolutely.
So if you talk to Jimmy Page, he's the biggest Led Zeppelin fan there is.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, he couldn't be more of a Zeppelin fan. So, you know, it's kind of infectious. And I think, you know, we were talking about this before we started, but I think it's worth saying again that I think if you come to an interview and you really know the subject and you respect the person you're talking to, they know it, you know? Yeah. I mean, I have this funny, the first time I interviewed Jimmy Page, I said to him, you know, my brother was a huge Led Zeppelin fan, but you guys weren't my band. I was a Yardbirds fan. I get that. And I obviously love Led Zeppelin. They're Led Zeppelin, but you know, and he was a little bit like, oh, that's kind of a weird thing to say. And we were talking about bootlegs. Yeah. And he said, well, how many Led Zeppelin bootlegs do you have? And I said, well, I actually have them on a hard drive and they're numbered, so I know I have 256. Sure. And he said, you have 256 Led Zeppelin bootlegs, but you're not a fan. And I said, well, you're Led Zeppelin. Obviously, I'm a fan. Yeah. And as a student of rock and roll and as a musician and as a guy who writes about it, that's my library. That's like, I have to know the basics of rock and roll history to be sitting here with you. And he loved that. He loved that. We got into like really esoteric conversations about some of the bootlegs. And he was so thrilled by that. First of all, because I wasn't completely starstruck. No. And we did have some mutual friends, which I will say that does help. Yeah, sure. But once we got into talking about it, we were two fans talking about music we had collected. Yeah. You know, we both grew up liking the same blues artists. We both grew up liking the same guitar. I mean, he's as much a Jeff Beck fan as I am. You know, that's the crazy, or Peter Green. Peter Green or Townshend for a while. And so, you know, I think once you get the flow of the conversation going, if you're not completely overwhelmed by the situation, and you can sort of hold your own, and you're sincere, you're genuine, you're thoughtful, You're not there to get them. You're not there to make them look bad. They know that. They've done this their whole lives. And I think that,
absolutely.
I mean, the first time I met Weller was in the early 90s, and he was struggling as a solo artist at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, he doesn't even remember that meeting, but I do, because it was really important.
Oh, of course.
And we've joked about it since, because he was, he's really matured into this amazingly gracious and generous guy. And at the time, he was a really prickly, difficult guy. And we joke about that now.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad, because, I wasn't intimidated when he was prickly.
No.
So I think he respected that. And he sort of remembers that I wasn't, I wasn't put off.
No.
And I think that's important. I think
yeah.
It's like if you meet somebody that you've always wanted to meet, and they're kind of shitty to you or whatever, I think everybody has a bad day.
Of course.
Not everybody. I was backstage at a Ringo show maybe 15 or 20 years ago, when Jack Bruce was in his all-star band, and Jack Bruce came backstage, and it's Jack Bruce from Cream. I was, for a split second, I was like, oh my God, Jack Bruce.
Yeah.
And he's like, and I asked him, I had a copy of Disraeli Gears, I asked him to sign it. And he said, he was a little drunk, don't you have any of my solo records? And of course I do, but I said, yeah, but this is what I brought. He's kind of shitty. And then he started, and he was like, he looked around, and everybody was kind of moving toward us.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm out of here. And I grabbed him, because there was a woman who was working for a charity who had to get everybody's signature.
Right.
And I said, listen, this woman needs everybody in the band's signature for this charity poster. You've got to sign this if you don't do anything else. And he was a little like, what the fuck? But I think that's partly my personality. But he kind of liked that I wasn't, I wasn't put off by him being nervous. So he was, he expected something, got something else, and was, maybe having a bad day, maybe having a bad, whatever it is. It's hard being on the road, but that didn't faze me. And I think that's important when you meet somebody. People tell these stories about, oh, he was a jerk, or he was everybody has a bad day.
Of course. I've got to tell you this, Jeff. There's something that really backs me up here, right? When we talk about not being intimidated by people and meeting people, especially I can imagine, like when you go on about Weller and his character and the way he is now. But my grandmother used to be principal dancer of the Royal Ballet in London, right? And she became a choreographer. But when she had her drama dance school in London, Anita Dobson went to her drama school, right? So all through the 1940s, when my nan was a dancer in the West End and meeting lots of different Hollywood film stars like your Danny Kaye's and Julie Waters and lots of different famous people, right? But obviously when I was a kid, and she's taking us to the theatre when she's doing the choreography for pantos and that, all through my life, and with her being really she is sort of best friends with Anita, and obviously with Anita being married to Brian May, right? So I've sort of had that in my lifetime where I've met people along the way, but also, Jeff, I've worked in hospitality. So we've worked in hotels like a Hilton and a Holiday Inn. So with having that kind of job, meeting all sorts of different people, and having my grandmother
in all different sorts of moods.
Yes. I used to be the breakfast chef. So you'd be out, looking after all that and doing this, that, and the other. And you'd meet, obviously, everyone's just got up. They want their breakfast and they want to go. Or you meet all kinds of different people. And you talk to people about, obviously, football or this, that, and the other. And I talk about music, of course. But it's put me in a good place. So when it comes down to these situations, I think I can hold my own to talk to people like yourself and not being intimidating, just be normal. Because, one day I want to meet Mr. Weller and I want to be able to talk to him about how I'm talking to you now. So, it's really important that I can get something going and carry on talking to people like yourself, so I can get to that place where, he's not going to go, oh, who's this geezer?
Well, and I think the thing with Paul too, though, is, I've interviewed him many, many times now, and there are times when I push the envelope of our friendship and ask him questions I know he doesn't want to be asked.
Yeah.
And he does still get irritated. I mean, he is still, he is still an impatient guy.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm not intimidated by his gruffness. And I think it's the same thing you're saying. Somebody at breakfast, they might not be in the best mood.
With Dylan, Jeff, he plays a big part in my life. And the reason why that is because Susanna loves Dylan and Neil Young. But we went to see Dylan and Neil Young in Hyde Park a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And for me being with Susanna now, and for us going to that gig in London, I want to know what Bob Dylan means to yourself, and the liner notes that you did for Bob. And what I think about Bob is he is such an incredible human being. I mean, his songwriting is unbelievable. And for everyone that has looked up to him as a, class act songwriter within the world, what do you think his legacy will always be about that man?
Well, look, I think we talked about the Beatles and now we're talking about Dylan. I think, with all due respect to, all these amazing artists over the last 60 years or so, history is unkind, and history is a blunt instrument. Yeah. And I think in, 200 years or whatever, or even 100 years.
Yeah.
All due respect to the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Kinks and Neil Young and all these artists who I love and listen to all the time.
Sure.
They're just not going to be remembered, and certainly not in the same way as Dylan and the Beatles.
Yeah.
Dylan and the Beatles are sort of the twin pillars of the 20th century, certainly the latter part of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And just remarkably creative and cultural changing artists in different ways, obviously.
Yeah.
The Beatles career was brief together, but I think in the end it'll all be lumped, their work together and their solo work, it'll all kind of be one thing.
Yes.
And with Dylan, I think there's so much to it. There's the poetry, there's the songwriting, there's the all the different styles he's worked in. He's also, a painter, and he's a welder, and he's got all these writer and, all these other things he does. I think he will be perceived historically as a real Renaissance artist.
Yeah.
And, I think, again, all due respect to somebody like Neil Young or even Leonard Cohen or Joni Mitchell, who I rank very highly as songwriters.
Yes.
Dylan, he was first in many respects, and he also has worn many, many, many different hats in the styles. He's, I love Leonard Cohen's music.
Yeah.
But Leonard Cohen's music is of sort of a piece. He has a voice that is singular, but it is also that voice.
Yeah.
Dylan has, he's done folk, he's done blues, he's done gospel, he's done country, he's really rockabilly, he's done everything over the course of his career, and he's done it incredibly well.
Yeah.
So I think, he will be seen, and, I also think his words, the poetry of his words have the caliber of them has been so high over such a long period of time
Yeah.
that it's hard to put anybody on par with that. So I think, I look, I grew up loving Bob Dylan. I respected him when I first became a professional musician and a songwriter and all those things.
Yeah.
He was so far removed from anything I thought I could ever attain. I just didn't even try. And I was in a punk band at the time, and the times were very different.
Yeah.
Over the years, the more I've learned about him, and the more I've tried to aspire to be better and challenge myself as a songwriter or even as a writer.
Yeah.
I've realized how truly amazing he is, and the more I learn about him.
Yeah.
5 years ago or so, I dug into his gospel period.
Yeah.
It's just this underappreciated era of his career that is just mind-blowing. He made gospel records and took a gospel review out on the road, like an old Sunday gospel review. It's just the craziest thing.
Yeah.
And so when I got the job to do the Blood on the Tracks liner notes,
yes,
and they gave me a copy of his notebook from the period, and they gave me all the audio from the sessions in chronological order. And I sat and listened to it and read along and sort of followed the changes and so forth. And it was interesting, what we had always imagined was that he went in with a band and it all fell apart.
Yeah.
He fired the band and then he did it himself. But what we realized very quickly was he never intended to make that record with a band.
No.
He went in to make it alone, and then he added a band later, and they didn't work out, and then he went back to what he originally intended, basically.
Yeah.
And then in order to make it, because he was a competitive guy, and there were other artists at the time like Neil Young and Jackson Browne and people like that.
Yeah.
He wanted to compete with them, so he recut some of the songs in Minnesota a little bit later, 3 or 4 months later, and together that made up Blood on the Tracks. But just reading his notebook and listening to him perform, every time he stepped up to the microphone, it blew. It was like he was 100% in the moment, in a way that most artists, when they're making a record, they're just trying to get a take. They're not really worried. They're not really. They're going to fix the vocal later. They're going to fix the guitar later. They're going to do this later. They're going to.
Yeah.
Everyone, when we would solo, the band would be playing and we would solo just Bob and his guitar.
Yeah.
And it was just mind-blowing every single time.
I can honestly tell you right now, when Susanna got the tickets for us to go down to Hyde Park to see Neil and Bob, both them two guys are both headliners. Absolutely. Huge, massive. So Neil Young, he's playing like 7, 8 o'clock-ish, Jeff, right? And it's still light, and the place is packed, and he's done a few hits and everything's good. But we were blown away by Bob that day. And I tell you something, even though he's just playing, he doesn't play, I know, we both know he doesn't play guitar anymore, but when he was playing his piano and doing his set list, and he was so beautiful to watch, Jeff. It was incredible. We had the sun was out, it was packed, and it was just like...
Yeah, people complain about his voice, or he doesn't play guitar or whatever, and I think they're not paying attention to the right things. I think his voice is amazing, and people have always complained about his voice. But the arc of the show, there's a story. It's as though that the set list is, he's telling you a story.
Yes.
And there's an arc to it, and there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and it really is, the story of the latter half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Or just the human condition. And I think that's, again, I don't mean to beat up on Neil Young, but they're just apples and oranges to me. And I love some of those songs.
Absolutely.
And I do not mean to denigrate Neil Young, but they're Dylan is in a league all by himself, in my estimation.
I think the same thing, Jeff. I think the same thing. It's just like,
and the more I learn about him, the more he amazes me. And I think that is not true for most artists. The more you sort of dig into their history and where they came from, a lot of them have very similar stories, you know, and their trajectory is the same, their inspirations are the same, they're, you know, and that's not a negative. It's just there are very few artists who are creating at the level that Bob Dylan creates at, which is at this other kind of, you know, meta level.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing. And we're alive in a time where he is making new music.
Absolutely. So lucky.
Yeah.
Would you say that he's your number one guy, and here's who you look up to the most with your own songwriting or your own inspiration?
Well, I think like any songwriter, we're crazy. I remember when I was first working with Pete Townshend, we were spending time together, and we would talk about Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And you know, he talks about most of the artists from that he sort of came of age with.
Yeah.
He talks about like their friends, or that they were like work colleagues. Like we would talk about somebody we worked with.
Sure.
But he talked about two artists, Dylan and Hendrix, in a different way, as though they did something different from what he and everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
And that was the problem for me for a very long time. I mean, you cannot aspire to be like Bob Dylan. You cannot aspire to write at that level or create at that level. I think you can only do your own thing. There are artists that I feel, you know, it's like people make the comparison for me with Tom Petty, and I knew Tom a little bit, and there's an Americana thing to my music. But you know, even an artist like Tom Petty, you know, there's nobody who writes songs like that. You know, so you know, inevitably, if you're aspiring to be even, you know, Tom Petty, you're never going to get there. I mean, he's creating, so you have to do your own thing. You can be inspired by these guys. Yeah. You know, you can take lessons from the way they approach their art, which was to do what they wanted to do and to not make concessions for the marketplace or managers or agents or, you know, whoever's telling you to do this or do that, or this will be popular, or this will get more clicks or likes or whatever. You know, that's not relevant in the long term. And in the arc of your career, if you're doing exactly what you want to do, and you're staying true to that, and you're 100% committed to that, not doing anything else, you just 100% commit to doing that thing, you will be your own, you know, you will be your own version of the thing that has inspired you. Yeah. And you may or may not get to any relatable level to theirs. Yeah. Because these guys are household names, and that's, you know, something that very few people attain. Yeah. But if I think the best thing is to be inspired, to be aspirational, but to sort of think in terms of, you know, oh, I wish I could write a song like Idiot Wind. I mean, no one's ever going to write a song like Idiot Wind. No. You know, you know, even Murder Most Foul. No, like nobody's going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And all due respect to, you know, all my friends here in New York City, you know, we all love Bob, but none of us are going to. Maybe once one of us will hit a home run, and it will be a song that will last, you know, that will have legs, that will last beyond our lifetime or our tenure as an artist. Yeah. But even that is so, like, you know, that seems impossible. So the idea that somebody who's written, you know, 20 or 30 or 50 songs that will stand the test of time and be here long after you and I are gone, let alone him. Yeah, sure. It's just not worth kind of bothering yourself with, in my estimation.
Yeah. You know, when you interview all these different guys, Jeff, do you think, like, I mean, with you being a singer-songwriter yourself and being in the business, and obviously, you know, you can go off and interview all these people, but, you know, you want to do your own thing. Do you look with your own ambition of, like, where you want to take your own music career, and what are your goals within yourself with your songwriting, and what's your, like, what are your plans with doing it?
I thought you were going to ask me something else, so I'll start with that, which is no. I mean, I think the first time I ever interviewed David Crosby, I knocked on his hotel room door, and he opened the door, and he said, he sort of, looked like this, and it's like, "You're not a journalist. You're one of us." And it's like musicians kind of can sense another musician.
Yeah.
There's a certain way we talk or relate, or there's a certain language, and I think that does, in my experience, that does put people at ease.
Right.
I think first of all, they know you understand, and I think also they feel like you're not going to stab them in the back.
Sure.
That you respect what they do.
Yeah.
But anyway, but as to your question, I don't, I don't sort of project onto the person. I try to be in the moment when I'm interviewing somebody.
Yeah.
I will say, when Noel Gallagher was making his first solo record, so he left Oasis. He was finishing his solo record.
Yes.
He came here to the States to do like a little press junket, and I knew the guy who had worked with him at Sony when Oasis were on Sony.
Right.
And so he invited me to this party to hear 4 or 5 songs and meet Noel. And at that moment, this is, I guess, 2011 maybe or so, I was making my first solo record.
Right.
And we ended up in a corner. This guy sort of grabbed me and grabbed him and threw us in a corner. And it was funny, the two of us, there's photos on the internet, the two of us talking, and we're like, gesticulating. I'm like this, and he's like this. It's very funny. But, we had both always been in bands.
Yeah.
And neither of us really wanted to be a front guy.
No.
And I remember him saying, talk to me in 6 months. I just don't even know if this is going to work. And so, there was something about our conversation I really related to what he was going through, because I was too. And we talked about making a record on your own without a band, just people coming in and so forth. And largely producing it ourselves and working with new people and unfamiliar surroundings and so forth. And then I interviewed him when the record came out, I guess about 6 months later.
Yeah.
He remembered that conversation. We referred back to it at the beginning of it. I interviewed him 2 or 3 times when the first record came out. And I always felt like, obviously he's a mega star, and I'm just sort of this sort of B-level alternative artist or whatever, indie artist. But our careers have tracked. We've made sort of similar amount of records. We've, toured at the same times, and we've sort of gone through this experience of not being in a band and being a guy up front and learning that job. And I remember the last time I saw him, we had coffee and I interviewed him, and we were talking about exactly that, that 10 years that had elapsed, and how, we'd fallen into this job that neither of us really wanted. He just wants to stand on the side of the stage, play the guitar.
Sure.
He'd be happy doing that.
Yeah.
And, if I could just play the bass and sing once in a while and whatever, there's a lot less pressure doing that. But, so I do think that, there are artists that I relate to in a more personal way. We're the same age. So there's something there,
Yeah.
But there's very few people that I project onto in that way.
Yeah.
Because it's just, if you're talking to, I don't know, Jimmy Page or Jackson Browne or Ringo, whatever, your life experiences are completely different.
Sure.
You're just not,
Sure.
there's no, I mean, yes, we have both played gigs and maybe even some of the same spaces, but the reality is, Ringo's Ringo. And Jimmy Page.
I mean, Jeff, I can tell you this right now, and I'm sure you get this with me, right? Noel Gallagher is my complete idol, right? That man, I have seen him since I saw Oasis 9 times, right? I've seen Noel 10 times, right? I went to see him at the Palladium when he played it, right? And I went down on my own on the train down to London, stayed in the hotel, went on my own, and I one ticket because of the cost, as you can imagine, right?
Sure.
But where I was sat, his wife Sarah was sat just in front of us, right? So at the end of the gig, and I tootled on over, and I went, just got to tell you, your husband is my greatest inspiration, and I've come on my own, because before I moved up here, this is when I was living south of Birmingham. I've come on my own from Birmingham. Your husband is the greatest inspiration in my life, and I just want you to tell him that. And she's like, oh, pleased to meet you, I'm Sarah, and yeah, I'll tell him. And it was just like, for all the times I've seen him, Jeff, and for me to meet her, and for my grandmother working in that theatre, it was a real special deal to me.
Sure.
But I mean, I've obviously just turned 40, and I left school in 97. So being a teenager in the 90s and having that band in my life, I've just, through the two brothers, through the both of them, but I've just turned into that man who just loves Noel Gallagher. And
sure.
He has gave me the inspiration to do the channel, his taste in music, that.
There you go.
Which I read your article when you interviewed him on that album. And I think with that album, when that came out, Jeff, me and Susanna just got together, and I saw him 3 times on that album, twice in Newcastle and at the Palladium. But he takes flack about his change and where he is now. And I just think it's going to be really interesting over the next 3 or 4 years, which way that he goes on his songwriting or with what he wants to do, because he will just do whatever he wants.
He really doesn't care about, again, this is, sort of not, I have a reputation of beating up on Liam, and I just disagree. I mean, it pains me the shape of his voice. I think that's the one thing. And I also I've interviewed both of them.
Yeah.
But I've talked to Noel quite a bit about the state of things. It just happened. It just comes up.
Yeah.
And it is an awful and sad situation. And like anything, knowing what I know, I do have, I kind of have taken sides.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that I just think that the music that Liam is making is not interesting, and the songs are sort of, paint by numbers versions of, sort of what Oasis songs might sound like in 2020, or, it's like what this team of songwriters have created. And look, in my mind, that's an artist who's playing to the cheap seats.
Yeah.
That he knows he can fill the biggest space possible because he's playing those Oasis songs.
Yeah.
He's playing songs that sound like Oasis songs.
Yeah.
But I just don't think his band is very good. I don't think those songs.
Do you know what?
The lyrics are terrible. Whereas I would rather see Noel in a smaller space doing something interesting.
Absolutely. Jeff, I can tell you what, right now, right? For a couple of things that you've just said, there's a guy I talked to in New Zealand called Scott. Yeah. He says exactly the same about Liam's band being not that great, not sounding so good, quite cheap, you know, and not having a great sound. Obviously, we both know about Noel's band and who's in there, and they are solid, they are strong, they have that creative sound, which makes me want to go.
Well, they could do anything.
They can do whatever they want. Whatever they want, they can do. And you know what? Yeah. That is so brilliant. To me, that is the best, you know, and that's what I want to pay to see. That's what I want to listen to. And with how much I feel about music, it's just, they've got it. Everything about that sound and that band,
I understand. Look, no disrespect to people who want to go see Liam and see him do.
Absolutely not.
They want to see him do the hits, and I've been to see him, and you know, and especially for people like you and I got to see Oasis many times.
Yeah,
we're very fortunate. There are a lot of people in Liam's audience who have not gotten to see that.
No,
and I know that when Noel plays, you know, on the first tour when he was doing Supersonic acoustic. He would do sort of a stripped down version of
Champagne
Supernova, you know, whatever. I know that's not exactly what a lot of people want to see. They want to see him, you know, they want to see the big, because they know, you know, that he's got the band. They could do note perfect versions of those songs. He's choosing not to do that. And I think, you know, it's like any artist that I love, you know, whether it's, you know, John Lennon or Joe Strummer or Paul Weller or Noel or Johnny Marr, you know, they're not doing the same thing they've done over and over and over. They're trying, you know, to sort of explore new territory. And I think that's what David Bowie is a perfect example of that, you know? And I think, and Townshend is a great example of that. So you know, I think, but I get it. I get the love for Liam. I get that he's still, you know, he's this sort of middle-aged man who's sort of acting like a 20, 30 something. You know, guys who are of his generation relate to that and like that. And younger guys are like, oh, I got to see the closest thing I'm going to get to Oasis. And I totally understand that. I think he could do much better. I don't need to see Oasis again. No. But I would love to see him with a better band, and I'd love to see him with better songs.
Yeah,
I just would.
Absolutely. I
mean, he's Liam Gallagher. He could get anybody to write with him.
Absolutely, and I think that's what he needs to do. And like, I was thinking about this the other day,
but
and
it's an easy decision.
Yeah, of course.
The
other side to this, Jeff, is just like, who is he? Who is he mates with, and who can he connect with? Because it seems like, you know, he's here and he's pushed everyone to the side, right? And
I mean, yes, and he's a difficult guy to deal with, and I can say that from personal experience.
Yeah,
I will say, look, I know that I'm not I don't shy away from criticizing him. I had been friendly with Bonehead for quite a while. And I don't hear from him anymore. And I'm sure that's because, you know, he's very tight with Liam, and they're, you know, they have a long history, and he really does love both those guys. But I think it's like kids in a divorce. You know, I think if I'm going to speak my mind about Liam, and he's in Liam's camp, I don't think I'm going to hear from Bonehead again for a while. And that's sad, because I really like Bonehead as a guy. But I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. I'm not going to not say what I think. If Noel puts out a crappy album, I'll be the first one to say it's a crappy album. And I didn't love The Man Who Built the Moon, but I loved that it was different, and I loved that he was trying something, and I loved that it was such a huge left turn, and some of it, especially live, really did sort of come to life in a way that, you know, that maybe didn't on the record, but I respected that he was doing something completely different, and I'm willing to go there. If Liam made, you know, a record with, I don't know, fucking Skrillex or something, I'd be all in. I just think that would be the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
Why not?
I
So
know.
to just make these sort of, you know, B- Oasis retreads is kind of not interesting to me.
I mean,
You know.
with especially Jeff, with who Liam idolizes the most, and this is another name I was going to talk about. And I know we've talked about the Beatles, and I know we talk about different songwriters, but with John, right? I mean, oh boy, I mean, what can you say about this man? Because,
Yeah.
in all fairness, okay, I was born in 1981, Jeff, right? In January 1981.
Wow.
Yes. 40 years
In a
ago.
world without John Lennon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? For the music fan that I am, it hurts. It really has hurt my whole life. Since I was like, you know, when you get into buying, like, obviously things like this, you know, it hurts that this guy who just had it, his voice, his songwriting, Jeff, his
intellect, just amazing.
Love. I mean, you know what? I seriously idolize the way that he found someone and had that goal where, you know what? I love you. I absolutely love you. This is my job, but you know what? I'm happy because I found the woman that I love. And you know what? In my life, Jeff, I idolize that more than anything.
Sure.
And it's just...
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's we recently had the Martin Luther King holiday here. And there was a lot of talk on the internet about how, you know, sort of white America has sort of rewritten Martin Luther King's legacy to be acceptable to the broadest amount of people, when in fact, like Bob Marley or John Lennon or, you know, and times 100, he was absolutely a revolutionary who was really hated by the majority of white America in his time. And I think, you know, from my point of view, and again, I hate doing this. I always end up the guy knocking Liam Gallagher. I know Liam loves John Lennon, but he seems to love the sort of vanillaed out version of John, not the John who, you know, the John Lennon that, you know, people who I'm friends with knew and worked with and you know, talk about, who had experiences with him. He, from Earl Slick to Ringo and whoever else, you know, he made the hard choices. He made, you know, he went with Yoko when that was absolutely the worst possible career move ever. Right? It's like, you know, for setting aside that the perception was she'd broken up the Beatles, the race issue in late 60s, early 70s England was a huge problem that, you know, he wasn't really able to address in his lifetime because it wasn't sort of part of our collective consciousness. He did talk about it. But it's like, this is a guy who, I mean, you know, you talk about like Weller or Noel or whatever, like they don't give a fuck. They're just going to do what they want to do. I think if Liam had a little more of that John Lennon in him, I'd feel more of a kinship to what he's trying to do. Rather than, you know, John never listened to the suits. John never did what a manager or a label told him to do. And, you know, maybe in the very, very early days because he had to, but he saw it as a means to an end. I think when you're established and you can make difficult choices, that's the mark of a true artist. So, and he was, you know, I mean, he was an amazing and complicated guy. In the best possible sense. So yeah, I mean, I feel you. You know, the world. I mean, I remember my sister and brother-in-law lived sort of not far here in New York City from John and Yoko, and you know, they'd be on the street, they'd be walking, crossing the side, you know, with the lights and just like anybody else. And you know, I think when I was a kid and I would be here, I was always looking for John Lennon. I mean, he was, you could run into John Lennon. That was a crazy thing.
Yeah.
And I remember visiting here after his death, and it just felt strange that like he wasn't part of our world anymore. It just seemed like such a shock. And I mean, and so subsequently to like work with people he worked with and be friends with people that were his friends is it's so sad that 40 is just so young to be gone. Back even in 1980, 40 was young, but now it feels especially young.
And I can honestly relate to this, Jeff, because with this last week, just turning that age, and still feeling a young, reasonable guy with so much to happen in life, for that to happen. I'll tell you what, man, it still upsets me now. And it's just like, because of the music fan that I am, because of who idolizes him, because of how much I love him, it's just, it hurts so much. But you know what, Jeff? It's just like, I've never been to America and I want to go to New York City. And you know what? One of the reasons why I want to go to New York City is because of him.
It's John Lennon.
Because of John.
Sure. He was absolutely an ambassador. I mean, I think, if there were two people who drew me to New York City as a kid, it was Joe Strummer and John Lennon.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. I mean, they just were such ambassadors for New York City.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then the other side to that is just like through when I turned 1920 and the way that the English indie sort of scene was changing, there was a lot of the American bands like Strokes, Yes, and it's just like, I love the Yes, Jeff. They're one of my favorite bands, and I would have loved to have seen that sort of band in the little sort of club place when they first started out. And they're another band that really wants me to go to America, and go to places like in New York City and see bands starting up from there.
Absolutely.
I can imagine it's amazing.
Well, right now, not so amazing.
No, I mean,
in theory, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what would have been your plans for this year?
Well, so in 2020, I had done a short tour in January. I had just played at the end of February at Town Hall here for the 80th anniversary of Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land. It was a big all-star show with Jeff Tweedy and a bunch of other people. And then I was supposed to make a record with Earl Slick. And then we were going to go out on the road in September, October, November.
Yeah.
And there was a show sort of built around the anniversary of the Double Fantasy sessions.
Wow.
Because Slick had played on those, and we'd gotten some other people who were involved. And there was going to be sort of a multimedia evening. There was going to be a discussion with some of the people who were there. And this author who'd written a book about it, and myself. And then there was also going to be music. And so, and that was going to be 2020. And that's a, pretty bit, plus all my writing and other stuff.
Yeah.
So all that, went away. And there were projects too that, I remember there was the first week after the lockdown, after the 12th or 13th, when everything shut down, March. I remember that Monday and Tuesday was one phone call after another, projects getting canceled, the tour getting canceled, everything sort of put life as we knew it being put on hold. And it worked out, I ended up doing streaming concerts and I put out some music and, there were other things. And I think the weird thing about 2021 is I think we all have sort of tentative plans and hopes, but, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we're supposed, they still want to do some shows at some point this year.
Yeah.
But everybody's moved to streaming. I was working with a promoter to contribute to a charity show next week, and there's another show for Valentine's Day. Those are going to be, I'm filming those performances and sending them in. You know, I'm working on a record. Slick's obviously involved.
Sure.
I've got the same bunch of guys who worked on my stuff last year, but I like Steve Craddock from Weller's Band's playing on it, and Ben Gordelier from Weller's Band's playing on it. And you know, but it's funny, like the last time I talked to Weller, he invited Slick and I over to work at his studio. I don't know when that's going to happen. I mean, I just don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah. Do you know Craddock quite well?
You know, not all that well. Our paths have crossed, I don't know, for 20 years because, you know, I've known Paul a little bit. And you know, it's like when they come to New York, I go backstage and I hang out and we spend time together, and he's been here a few times with the specials. So we'll connect, but it's mostly texting and FaceTime and you know, like this, because you know, we're in different time zones and different countries
absolutely.
And the other thing is, you know, if they're here and they're on the road, or I'm there and I'm on the road, it's very hard to connect. You know, other than at the hotel or after a show or, you know, whatever. So I'd love to say we're friends, but it's more, you know, email and texting and things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, if he's playing on my record, so obviously we're more than just passing friends.
The only reason why I ask is because I've met him twice, and that was for Ocean Colour Scene. The first time I saw him, I was going to see Ocean Colour Scene in Birmingham. Me and my mate Rudders, we literally got in the queue like early. They counted everyone through. We were like, hang on a second, they've let it in a bit early. We watched their sound check. So Simon, Oscar, you know, and Stephen, that obviously came down the front, and then, you know, you was looking for little bits in your paper, and if someone had a pen, you got their little autographs and that. Then I was out one night in Birmingham, and he was like sat talking to someone and that, and it was just like, that's Steve Craddock over there. So he went over and said hello. But yeah, I've met Simon out of Ocean Colour Scene quite a few times, and I've spoke to him like I was speaking to you. And when I was speaking to him, I was like saying, so Ocean Colour Scene have been going for such a long time now. When do you reckon they're gonna start getting the recognition and start winning awards? And he was just like, well, to be honest, it's just like, just playing live is our reward because we're still going, you know? And it's just like, I can honestly say, Jeff, they're one of my favourite bands because we've living in that part of the country for a long period of time, and being obviously the music fan that I am, they're a really important band to Birmingham.
Well, and any band that I mean, Mosley, Shoals, and Marching Already, any band that can make those two records, if they did nothing else, that's enough.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's, you know, with Steve, you know, we've had a lot of conversations. I think he knows, you know, I'm a fan, you know, and I think what he does with the songs that people bring in, that Weller brings in, or that Simon, you know, whatever. You know, he's sort of their secret weapon in many respects. You know, he's such a great player. So.
Absolutely. And I think what a golden period to have musicians like Craddock and I suppose Johnny Marrs and John out of the Stone Roses, John
Squire,
it was like when I was talking to Paul Tickler.
The Seahorses were a very underrated band. I love them.
Absolutely. I can remember hearing Love Is the Law for the first time, you know, being like 15. Thinking like, do you know what? This is amazing. This is amazing. There were so many times, Jeff.
Totally overlooked, which is a bummer.
They had obviously had issues. I mean, obviously when he came out of that band and, you know, getting together. I can honestly tell you this. I've been looking at making an episode for my Universe channel on the Seahorses, Jeff. And I've listened to, obviously, about that band and the stories. I mean, Chris was like busking outside like Woolworths in like York. And I think it was like a roadie or a sound technician for John, or a friend gave his voice on tape to John Squires and then got him into the Seahorses. So
crazy.
But the guy that produced that album, who produced a lot of Bowie's stuff?
Tony Visconti.
Yes, he produced that album. And it's just like, you know.
Great producer. Another good friend of mine, oddly enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy how the time's passed on Bowie, Jeff, but I think he seriously he has left a huge, massive legacy. And I think he's the ultimate pop star with Bowie.
Yeah. It's fascinating too, because in many respects, the larger public, the public at large, didn't really realize how significant and important he was in everyone's lives until he was gone. I mean, music fans, people who loved him all along, knew that legacy and were already like, man, if you haven't listened to Outside, you got to check out Outside. And, you know, these little sort of esoteric, you know, turns he took in his career. And now that people are appreciating that, and younger people especially, I think is really, really something amazing. Again, this is a guy who did exactly what he wanted to do. He never really worried about what the marketplace wanted him to do.
Yeah.
You know, there were, you know, he obviously made some decisions that were market oriented, as any artist will do. But by and large, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do all along.
Yeah. I think like when I've watched like documentaries on Bowie as well, it's just like his time periods and how he changed his style. And, you know, he was going to go here, like, has he gone to Germany or something where he's made albums? And the different places, different parts of the world he's been to make music, like the Heroes album. And just try and change. And I think for a lot of young musicians, Jeff, doesn't matter where they are in the world, like this country or America, I think it's very important that musicians learn this now, especially with the way that things are at the minute, but how they're going to progress in like over the next 2 years or so, where you want to poke the fire and get it burning again.
Yeah. Well, look, you know, this is actually something before even the pandemic that I talked about with Noel Gallagher, which was, you know, he said there were so many records, these sort of singer-songwriter records, that all sort of sounded the same.
Absolutely.
Because everybody was making records on GarageBand in their bedroom.
Yeah.
And if you don't have bands playing in garages and finding their voices and then traveling, like going out and traveling and meeting people and being exposed to other music and, you know, record shops all over the world, I mean, that's where you get inspiration. That's where you get your ideas. If you're just stuck in your bedroom, it's going to sound like you're stuck in your bedroom. So, you know, not that you can't get great inspiration there. No. Billie Eilish is obviously the exception, but there are a lot of those sort of homegrown singer-songwriters. You know, I think you need to get out there and experience stuff to make great music. And Bowie was always, you know, I think, look, I've talked to many people who worked with him, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he never saw himself as a rock and roll star or a front guy. No. He saw himself as a performer, as a sort of almost theatrical performer. Yeah. So he was taking on a different role every time he made a record. And it was easier for him to put on this mask. Yeah. Because then when he came off stage, he could take that mask off. He could be Davy Jones again. Yes. Not David Bowie. And I think that was, you know, I'm reading a lot into it, but I think that was easier for him to live life off stage because he was not that other guy. Yeah. So, when
the other week I've watched your interview with Steve Jones at the Pistols, right? And when you was talking about like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, have you been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yourself?
I have not, and I, you know, look, I'm a voter. Yeah. You know, I love the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I, you know, like anybody, I have my issues with it. I think we were talking about bands that I didn't want to be.
Yeah. But it's something that I really love to watch, especially like obviously, you know, the people that we love and we've grown up listening to.
Yeah.
I really love hearing stories of, obviously, of, we're here, you get to that golden point. But I really love hearing the stories of when
and you know what too,
these
look,
guys get there.
For every band, I might think, I wish they weren't in there, or I don't think they deserve to be in there, or whatever. I'm really grateful that, like, the Small Faces are in there, or T-Rex, or inducted this year, because, I mean, the kids nowadays, they don't know about T-Rex. So if that makes them go, oh, who's this band T-Rex, and check them out, that's a good thing for everybody. So I've mixed feelings about. I'm not rock and roll for me doesn't necessarily belong in a museum. So my idea of getting involved and being a voter there is, maybe a little bit of the anarchist within.
Sure.
I would like to see more of, more of my bands in there, and I think that's what everybody who's a voter wants to see, or anybody who's a fan, everybody who votes in the online polls.
I mean, I can honestly tell you, I'm not sure. I know obviously there's certain things that are in there, but I know there's probably people that's not in there that have seriously got to go in, and it's just like, I hope people don't judge him because of, like, the politics or this and the other about it.
I think that's becoming less and less a part of it, as the people on the board who really controlled who got in for a very long time are getting older and retiring and moving on.
Sure.
There's a younger batch of people getting involved, and I think they're much more open to a very disparate group of artists getting nominated, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What have been your favourite parts of England when you've come over to play? What are your favourite places that you like to go, or have you seen?
Well, I've seen. Look, as a Beatles fan, it was a thrill to play in Liverpool, be in Liverpool, and have fans in Liverpool really embrace my band, The Badge, and then myself as a solo artist. London is always great because it's London. Brighton was a kick because of the connection with the mod scene.
Absolutely.
For me, it was surprising because there were other places, Leicester and Leeds and Manchester and Birmingham, Sheffield, where I wasn't really as aware of, Birmingham, I was aware of the music scenes, but I wasn't aware of how supportive the fans there were, that they really want to see live music. They kind of didn't care if you were the hottest band. They just wanted to see good music. So they come and judge you on your performance. And so when my band, The Badge, was playing in the late 90s and 2000s in, places like Leeds and Leicester, we built a following just because we played there. People would come and then they would come again and bring their friends. And I thought that was the coolest thing. So, having traveled all over the country, it's always amazed me how, no matter where you were, there were pockets of real, true music fans who want to see live music, and didn't they were willing to buy your CDs and buy your merchandise just based on what they saw. You didn't have to be the hottest thing. They just wanted quality. So that I think that was the most surprising and exciting thing about playing there.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and like you say, you're absolutely right. I mean, if I've gone to a gig with my mates or with Susanna or whatever, and it's just like, if you see someone and you hear that track and there's something about it, it's just like, it's the best,
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, here in America, it's a little more, it's a little more, you have to, and it's a little more, it's a little more built around the machine of who's the hottest, latest. There's so many bands and the country is so large, it's hard to get any attention. Whereas I remember when we were in the Badge and we'd tour around, we were going to England every 3 or 4 months for a couple of weeks, and we would tour the whole country. And after a couple of years of doing that, people knew who we were. not because we were on the BBC. I mean, we did get on the BBC, which was nice.
Yeah.
But because we kept coming. And you know, the first time it might have been 30 people, and the next time it was 50 people, and the next time it was 100 people. And that was the sort of exciting thing about it, was you could build it without having to be part of this machine. And I know that was really special.
Have you had any plans, like, I mean, like when you were talking about, like, obviously 2020 and making your new record, and obviously having all these plans with the different projects, was coming to Britain in your plans?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, and we were going to try to come in 2020, or at the very least come this year.
Yeah.
And now 2020 is sort of pushed into 2021, you know, and also with Brexit, I just don't know what's possible. You know, I mean, I think as a musician, I mean, I was going to say the unintended consequences, but I think they knew the consequences. I think they just weren't really honest about what the consequences were going to be for live music.
No,
I think it remains to be seen how this plays out.
I mean, I think
it's because as a band coming from America, what you would normally do is you would come to England and you would do it in England, and then you would probably go to the continent and do, you know, a few other, you know, you do it all in one. And I don't think that's even possible.
No, I mean,
not because of the pandemic, but because of Brexit.
I mean, you know, someone in your position where you're talking and you've got friends within the business, and I mean the big time players, like obviously, let's say Pete Townshend, for example.
Yeah, he can afford to do whatever he wants.
He can afford to do whatever he wants. And I know Roger's piped up recently about it, and I've not really read what he's said. But I mean, okay, the big time players, they can do what they want, but it's a small time play. It's a new band that concerns me, where obviously, you know, getting over to countries like America or Europe or anywhere, the problem and how much it's going to cost for these guys to go on the road as well. Yeah. You know, with record companies. I read something this afternoon on social media where somebody said the record companies, if they've got cash, they should invest in like venues to help them going, because you know what, Jeff? I hope over the next, let's say, 5 years, we ain't going to lose venues in that, because and important ones. It's
not just losing venues. It's the consolidation of ownership. It's like the venues may exist, but if you've only got a couple of people owning all of them, that's a problem too. Yeah. So, you know, getting around is going to be very difficult. The cost, visas and touring and all those things are going to be difficult. But if only 1 or 2, 3 owners have a sort of lock on all of the venues at every different size, that's a problem too. Because, you know, the venues, when I was in the Badge and we were playing places from, you know, 100 to a couple of hundred people, those are all, I don't know if most of those exist anymore. You know, I mean, the last time I was over, as a solo artist, I did some charity stuff up in Liverpool, but I did some acoustic things in London and Oxford. Yeah. And I know that the venues in Oxford are gone, and I don't know if Filthy McNasty's, I mean, it's been there forever. I don't know if it even still exists. So it's like, you know, and I don't know if it does today. I don't know if it will tomorrow. So, you know, the politics of things has complicated being a musician in a way that you're right. If you're not, you know, if you don't have sort of a business manager and an apparatus around you, it's going to be very, very difficult to navigate.
So, Jeff, I'm going to talk to you about Roy Orbison, because I honestly believe this man has had probably one of the greatest voices of all time.
Absolutely.
He has wrote some of the best songs of all time.
Amazing songwriter. Yeah.
Incredible. I think people in this country have not gave him the credit he deserves. as in like people like my age.
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
he has a huge following in the UK, so I don't know if that's true or not. But maybe
No.
maybe younger people are less aware of it.
Younger people are less aware, but I think they do need to be aware. And I think where the time ticks with music, I think he is someone that people need to look back on to think like, you know what, this guy was absolutely mega. I know you talked about him as a guitarist being absolutely amazing.
He's a great guitar player. Yeah, that's an amazing thing. He's not known for that, and yet he was a pretty great guitar player. Yeah.
So, Jeff, how did it feel when his family approached you for the book, and how did you feel doing that, and what was it like?
Well, I had interviewed Roy's son Alex when they were putting out a deluxe edition of the Mystery Girl album, the last album he made during his lifetime. Which is a pretty all-star album. They did a deluxe version of it, I guess, maybe 9 years ago. And I interviewed his son Alex for Esquire.
Yeah.
And we hit it off. I don't know exactly. And then when he was in town a couple of months or a year later, working on another project, he asked me if I wanted to meet up for dinner, and we went out and we just had the greatest time. And I think, in retrospect, maybe I was auditioning to a certain degree, but not long. And his manager was there at the time for this dinner. And a couple of months later, or maybe not even, the manager called me up and asked if I'd like to. What they had done is Roy had started a book before he died.
Yeah.
And then after he died, his wife Barbara had picked it up, but then she had passed away. And so they had all this. And they also had a guy who had done a bunch of research, just like an amazing amount of research. He'd collected memorabilia and ephemera and all sorts of news clippings and information about Roy. So they had about 1 million words, but it wasn't a book.
No.
And so he called me up and he asked me if I'd be interested, similar to the Beatles, would I be interested in writing this book with the Sons? Yeah. And of course, yes, of course I'm,
Absolutely.
And, I think part of it was, in getting to know his son Alex pretty well during that period, he knew I loved Roy. I knew a lot about him as a student of rock and roll and as a Roy Orbison fan, a real Roy Orbison fan. Yes. I knew a lot about him, but I also really loved him. It was sincere.
Yeah.
So, we put the agent together, got a package together, and got us a publishing deal.
Yeah.
And I set about working through the research, and it was a Herculean task, I will say. Cutting 1 million words down to 80,000 and telling a story is difficult. But they had this amazing archive of pictures. The book it's a coffee table book. And it's really told as much as we could from Roy's point of view.
Yes.
Because we did have material that he left behind and a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
And so, it came together, I have to say, really quickly. The book came together really quickly. I'm really proud of it. And I got to be, I got to be friends with not just Alex, but Roy Jr. and his son Wesley. Yeah. From his first marriage. And, they're really, we're all really close now. Roy Jr. and I are talking about making a record together. And Alex and I have played together when we did the Tom Petty birthday show in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. They came and performed with us, and we had guys from the Heartbreakers and Jim Keltner, who'd been in the Wilburys. Yeah. We did some traveling Wilburys. I mean, we're good friends. We're really close now. So it was like, it's like being in a war together. You're like, you've sort of been through this experience together. Yeah. But, telling Roy's story the right way, because there had been books about him previously, was really important. Yeah. Obviously not just to me, but to them. And I think we got it right. I think we did him justice. I think that the book, there's so many of those books now. It maybe didn't get enough attention certainly with younger people. It was because it was a coffee table book. It maybe was more for the older fans who loved it, and I still get letters about it to this day. I believe they're in the process of making a film about his life.
Fantastic.
And so I think that will hopefully introduce him to a younger audience, because like you said, I mean, he was such a unique singer and unlike any other singer in rock and roll history, but he was also this amazing songwriter who never wrote to a formula.
No.
Every song was just full of emotion, and he didn't follow the normal structures. He just sort of went where the story took him. And lest we forget, he invented the rock and roll image of all black and the black sunglasses, and that was almost by accident. So that and the fact that he was this amazing guitar player who's sort of forgotten that he was this amazing guitar player. I mean, one of my favorite stories was Roy Jr. insists, from stories his dad told him, that Keith Richards did not dream Satisfaction, but that the Stones were on the bill with Roy in Australia.
Wow.
And he was playing, he was closing the show every night with Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
And Pretty Woman was really the first rock and roll song built around a repeating riff. Right?
Yeah.
And Mick and Keith heard this every single night. They would stand in the wings and they'd hear him doing this.
Yeah.
And their next stop after the Australian tour with Roy was Los Angeles, and they recorded Satisfaction.
Wow.
So he's 100% sure that Keith really got the idea for Satisfaction from that. And think about how many repeating riffs came after Pretty Woman and Satisfaction, Day Tripper and Sweet Child of Mine, all these songs that built around these repeating riffs. So Roy was this very sort of unique artist who was also incredibly humble. I mean, he was as successful in the 60s and 70s, when he was sort of, people think of those as his wilderness years. He was as successful as Elvis.
Yeah.
There were very few people in that category, and he was good friends with Elvis.
Yeah.
And so that he had this third act in the 80s as a solo artist in the Black and White Night show, television special, and also the Wilburys, was sort of just icing on the cake. So I think he's a little bit forgotten, but I think we're doing what we can to get him back into the public, the spotlight.
Yeah.
I think the movie will do the trick. And But if you have any questions about Roy, I know a lot about Roy Orbison, and I'm happy to talk about Roy.
Jeff, you know what? When we talk about Roy, and you talk about the film, I mean, like, films I absolutely love, especially films on people within music. Sure. I think that would be absolutely amazing. It really would be good. It makes me think about who out there could be the man.
Well, that's the difficult part. But I think it puts him back in the cultural consciousness in a way that it really needs to happen. Because like you said, I know 20-somethings, teenage kids probably don't really know more than one or two Roy Orbison songs, and there's at least 20 great ones. So, and there's a whole, segment of his catalog from his MGM years in the 60s that's almost forgotten. There was a box set a few years ago, and there's just tons of great songs there. So he's just one of those guys who, no matter how much you listen to him, there's more.
I mean, for when it comes down to the part of like whoever gets that job, how they will have to train their voice, how they will obviously hear their hair, the look. I mean, it would be that. I can honestly tell you now, Jeff, that will win Oscars, right?
Yeah. If they get the right person.
If they get the right director and the script, and I mean, you can talk about the lead role, obviously, who's going to play Roy, but obviously there will be other, people within his life with the right actors to be in that film. that's a really exciting project for a
Yeah.
band like myself. And that is really what I want to have. I mean, when that comes on the big screen, you're going to see that, because that,
and I think for anybody who's watching or listening who maybe is a casual fan or isn't really much of a Roy fan, it's similar to what we were talking about John Lennon earlier.
Yeah.
I love Yoko because John chose Yoko, and if John Lennon chose somebody like that, they have to be great. All of the Wilburys, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Tom Petty, and Bob Dylan, they were diehard Roy Orbison fans. They were excited more about working with Roy than about each other. And so if those guys, who we all love, were Roy Orbison fans, he's, I think, worth checking out for the casual fan.
Yeah, I mean, and with all these people that we've talked about today, Jeff, it's just like I just love the music films, like the film Ray and The Doors, and the list can go and like Walk the Line. We know it all, right? But even in my last video on the Monkees, I talked about they could make a film on that.
Absolutely.
And you know what? They should. There should be guys in America now rolling out these scripts to get these actors for all these films to come out, because you know what? It's going to make a hell of a load of money. So, Jeff, with the single Heartbreak, how long did it take for you to write that, and where was you when you wrote it? Because I think that's important when you have people putting these things together. Whereabouts was you, and what was you thinking at the time of putting that song together?
That was, so at the beginning of the year, we thought we were going to be making a record and going on the road in 2020, and that wasn't going to happen. So I was already writing for an album, and it was one of the songs. I had a batch of about a dozen songs or so, and some of them were pretty good, I thought, and some of them I'm glad we had more time because they weren't as good as they should be. And Heartbreak was one of those songs that sort of came out of the blue one day, fully formed, like it was done. And those are always the best ones, where you're like, oh, I've got an idea, and you sit down, and a half an hour later, there's a complete song, and you know what you want it to sound like, you know who you want to play on it.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about that was normally that probably would have been recorded with my regular live band and with Earl Slick, but because of the pandemic, I've forgotten exactly the sequence of events, but somehow I had a demo with just me and acoustic guitar to a click track, and Paul Weller's drummer, Ben Gordelier, said, "Oh, I heard you say on your live stream that you're making a new record. If you got anything you want me to play drums on, I'll play drums on." So I sent it to him, and he added the drums, and it instantly elevated the song. And so then I sent it to my friend Jordan Summers, who plays with the Wallflowers, and he added keyboards. And then Lee Harris, who plays with Nick Mason, Saucer Full of Secrets, added guitar. All my friends were at home doing nothing.
Yeah.
So I was able to, via, just the internet, just transfer the files to them, and they were able to work from home.
Yeah.
And then Slick, Earl Slick, added his guitar. And I was working all along with this producer, Eric Lichter, as a studio up in Connecticut, who's an amazing producer. And we were sort of bouncing ideas off each other of how to, the sound we wanted it to have.
Yeah.
And it didn't have bass. It was sort of this weird circumstance. And I was talking to Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, who's another buddy of mine.
Wow.
And he said, "Oh, I'll do bass." It never occurred to me to ask him, because he's Duff McKagan, and but he, he's just a guy on vacation like the rest of us. So he did it, and I didn't know what to expect because, he's Duff. He's in a, rock and roll band. And what he did was just so special and unique. It was really great. And so then I sent it to a guy in Kentucky who's a really, really amazing mixing guy named Dwayne Lundy. And the rough mixes were good, but the the mixes that a real mixing artist does were just, incredible and really lifted the song. And then this guy named Justin Perkins mastered it. And all of those elements, I'd set sort of a deadline for it last September. So it all came together really quickly toward the end of the summer. And, I kind of, I'd done this I've made many records over the course of my career.
Yeah.
But there was something really unique and special about it. I was really proud of it. We got a guy named, because we couldn't make a video, this guy named Alex Rosas to do an animated video.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's really good.
It's very cool. And he did that on a really quick timeline. Everybody worked, it's one of these things where everything just sort of came together in the right way.
Yeah.
And it also became the blueprint for the album we're making, because it was exactly, we had the time to sort of let it percolate and the stew to kind of develop a little bit, to marinate. And so now me and Eric, the producer, knew sort of the direction we wanted to go with everything else. So I continued to write. We didn't settle for the batch of songs we had, which are originally for sort of a Slick and Slate album. So I continued to write, and now I just got some stuff back, as I was saying earlier. Steve Craddock did some stuff, and Ben's done more drum parts, and just other friends of mine have been adding parts to the newer songs.
Yeah.
And it's been a pretty special experience. But Heartbreak was the beginning of that.
Yeah.
And hopefully there'll be a record later in the year, and we'll be able to play it live. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's
work, but we'll see.
So is Earl Slick part of your band now? Are you two gonna stick and work together?
Yeah, so Slick and I have known each other for more than a decade. We've played together a lot, and we're just good buddies. And so whenever he needs something from me, I help him out, and whenever I need so he doesn't play every show I do, but he's always happy to play on my records. And look, he's a guy who played with not just Bowie and Lennon, but Ian Hunter and a long list of other people. So to have him play on my stuff always makes it a lot better than if it were just, me or whoever else.
Does he live in New York?
Yeah, he lives just outside of New York City. Yeah.
Cool. So do you like speak all the time, and even when you're not working, do you hang out or whatever?
Yeah, he's probably one of my best friends.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Which is a weird, it's weird. We did a gig a couple of years ago in my hometown.
Yeah.
And the venue was an outdoor venue, and it was facing the building that used to be the record store when I was a kid that I bought Double Fantasy in.
No way.
And I remember saying to the audience, like, here's Earl Slick playing in the band. And I remember reading the liner notes to Double Fantasy, being like, what a cool name, and who's this guy, and the guitar is amazing. And here he is. Now we're friends and playing together. So life is funny. And that was my point about earlier, saying, stick to this and just sort of see it through as far as you can see it, because you don't know where it's going to take you.
No. It's pretty amazing to have that friendship for you, Jeff. Like, knowing that you've got musicians in your band that can create that sound.
Yeah.
That is going to be very unique.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Absolutely.
And for the musicians that they are, you can probably say whatever you want. You can probably ask for whatever you want, because you've got the best in the business.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't really produce or direct them very much. I just let them do what they do, because these are guys who, if they hear a song, they know where it needs to go. And far be it from me to try to tell Slick what to play. I mean, he knows what to play.
Of course, yeah. It's a golden era, I suppose, of
I mean, he played on many records that are in both our record collections. He played on my first solo single in 2010.
Yeah.
Which also had Carlos Alomar on it, which was kind of cool. from Bowie and Lennon too.
Yeah.
And so it's been and he played a lot on my 2016 record, Secret Poetry. I don't think he was on my album Birds of Paradox, but that was more, I had a couple of guys from Lennon's band Elephant's Memory and a couple of the guys from Wings were on that record. And so Simon Townsend was on that record, and Gene Parsons from the Byrds. So, it's like, whenever I make a record, I hear the people that I love playing the parts, and I'm lucky enough to be able to contact them and say, hey, would you add whatever to them?
Yeah.
And, they almost always say yes. I mean, these are guys who love to play. They're not, as much as they're, famous or big name artists, or we feel like they're inaccessible, they're just guys who play guitar or drums or whatever, and they love to play. So if you give them something, I think that they feel is worth doing, and I try to, they have fun with it.
Absolutely. So when you come to Britain and when you're touring, will Slick be with you when you're playing?
Yeah, I think he and I will be over in 2020, early 2022.
Yeah.
That's the plan is now to be over in January, February 2022. Yeah. If not before.
Well, wouldn't that be absolutely brilliant?
But definitely then.
And I can honestly assure you, when you are here, we will come and see you, and that would be amazing.
We'll make sure to make it to Newcastle. We can play your Simon's Universe night.
Hey, that could be, you could be the headline act,
There you go.
We'll sell the tickets, we'll get them all in, we'll have a few drinkies, and everyone will be happy.
There you go. Sounds like a night.
And isn't that what everybody wants?
It is. We're coming up on a year. It's hard. Everybody's feeling the sort of malaise of being stuck inside.
Yeah.
I'm able to write here and record here, but it doesn't make it any easier. So
no, I mean, the amount of people that obviously I'm sure we're both talking to, as in the music universe, let's say, are itching at the bit to obviously, get out
just
there.
Get out, see some
just
live
get
music,
out there,
have
see
some
some
fun.
live music.
Yeah.
I've said to friends, Jeff, I said, I hope you all saving the pennies for when obviously it happens, because for when the tickets come out, this is a really thing to say. When the tickets come out, right, and everyone and companies and everything are going, right, these are playing, and how much obviously tickets are going to be, you could have one gig coming, next Wednesday, the tickets are going to come out for this gig, right, and it's going to cost you this much, not knowing that there's going to be your other favourite bands that are going to be playing, in a couple of months' time. The next week.
Yeah.
So it's crazy, but it's exciting.
It is.
So,
it is. Looking forward to getting out.
Absolutely. More than anything.